There we go. All right, thank you everybody for your patience. The open session order. Let's go ahead and start with Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Futura?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Mendoza?
Present.
And Mayor Burse?
Present. All right, we will go ahead and note that Councilmember Ackerman and Councilmember Lohman are both absent this evening. All right, we have no report from closed session because there is no closed session this evening. And let's see here. We will go ahead and entertain a motion to approve the agenda order.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Futura?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Mendoza?
Aye.
And Mayor Burse?
Aye. All right, moving on to the consent calendar. These items are routine and non-controversial in nature and are to be approved by one blanket motion. Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar, or do I have anyone who wishes to pull an item?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, roll call.
And Councilmember Futura?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Mendoza?
Aye.
And Mayor Burse?
Aye. All right, moving to item 4, agency reports. We'll start with Placer County Sheriff.
Good evening, Mayor Burse, ladies and gentlemen of the council. I'm John Tanneromi. I'm a deputy with the Placer County Sheriff's Office. I work in Colfax. I have some statistics this month, so I'm doing better than last month. Overall calls for service decreased by 8%. Traffic accidents decreased by 40%. And traffic stops increased by 77%. So I don't know if those are related, but we're going to say they are. It's a good stat. Transient up 114%, which looks like a big number, but just down 24%. I think that's related to Snowmageddon, and some of that bled into January. So my experience is that February has been it was a pretty regular month. Citizen calls with patrol responses are also down, meaning it wasn't handled over the telephone. It was a deputy went out and responded. Mm-hmm. Deputy initiated calls are up 21%. That's traffic stops and things like that. That's for the city of Colfax.
And how many was that? When you say it's up 21%, what was
So
it?
68 deputy initiated calls in the month of February. That's for the city portion of the Charlie beat. The rest of the Charlie beat, and I can give you numbers, 73 calls for service, down 9%. Transient related calls down 13% from 8 to 7. Total citizen calls, January we had 61, February we had 45. Citizen calls with responses were 60 and 40. And I think, again, that was storm related stuff. Priority one call is like a lights and sirens call. Priority 2 is most of the other stuff. We had 10 priority 2 calls in the outlying areas of the Charlie beat. Deputy initiated calls in the outlying Charlie beat increased from 19 to 28, which was a 47% increase. And the Charlie car responded to the Edward beat to cover the George car 9 times. So those are stats. Does anybody have any questions for me?
I don't have anything in particular. Council doesn't. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on. I don't see CHP here this evening, so we'll do Placer County Fire Department / CAL FIRE.
All right, Madam Mayor, City Council, my name is Jeff Lovelace, the new battalion chief for CAL FIRE, Placer County Fire Department. So Chief Estes gave a wonderful introduction, so to serve this community, to cooperate with you and as it pushes forward, just the communication, I look forward to continuing that process. Within the first 4 hours of my assignment, we ended up getting dispatched to a structure fire off of Old Grass Valley Road. With that, I was able to see the partnership with the city, along with other jurisdictional departments, approximately 3,000 square foot structure with heavy smoke and fire in the attic that was about 20 feet up. So it made it difficult to make access to this, and seeing the firefighters capabilities was impressive. So with that training, it has paid off in seeing that in live action. For the training itself, last week, we were able to train up the volunteers and certify them in some of their annual training. That includes throwing 24-foot ladders appropriately, self-contained breathing apparatuses, on in a timely manner. So we were able to sign all those off in a successful manner. Other things, 6 acres of prescribed net there where we for an additional 12 acres that we see, obviously weather dependent as it comes closer. So again, that coordination with both of those was good to see. I would be remiss if I for the river incident that some of you folks read, but it was the cause of the river incident, and this is all on online that you can read it yourself. But some of the highlights for this, and this came out on March 7th, 2022. It started alongside or brush alongside the river's edge at the Bear River Campground. With the river fire has been determined to be human caused. So other than that,
do you know if there's any prosecution going on?
So I will tell you, I'm not privy to some of the investigation that's done at our law enforcement, where they keep it pretty tight, where that goes. And I will say if there's further information that pushes it to an arson or that direction, if anybody has some of that, they can share that information. But unfortunately, I'm not privy to that.
Okay, I just would like to know if it's closed. And if you don't know, next time you're here, just give me an update.
And I can do that. I will say, with new information, with the investigation, if new facts come up, they will continue that process of investigation.
Mike, it looks like you've got some more details.
That's absolutely correct. Right now, the investigation is closed until we receive any further information that comes in. Unfortunately, with this investigation, I'm not privy to it, even though I was a bureau chief for 7 years. Somebody else has taken over that helm. So it was a very intensive and quite honestly scientific investigation that has to be done to be able to hold up in a court of law. So our biggest critic of this investigation, honestly, is when that fire started, if you read Facebook, TikTok, any of the social media, there was already somebody that was caught, somebody that was prosecuted, and they had it figured out, somebody that was lynched, and they were, given ready to put a rope up in town here. And that is completely wrong. So that's the truth. If we do have a suspect, it has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that that person did it. And that's the foundation that our country and this state and this city fall upon, right? So the last thing we want to do is put someone in jail that didn't do it, right? So I know, and I don't know a whole lot about this investigation because while they were doing the investigation, I was over at the command post dealing with all the stuff that was going on there. But I know with any of these investigations, it's a very thorough and very scientific investigation. When I say scientific, there's a scientific methodology that goes through with any fire investigation. With a lot of times we call it, that says that we know that somebody lit that fire and that's an arson investigation. Well, sometimes we don't have arson investigations. We do origin and cause of the railroad tracks. Was it a vehicle, so on and so forth. There's a lot of things that have to go in to prove that investigation. Unfortunately, it's not CSI Placer County. We don't solve these crimes in 24 hours. And it takes a long time to solve some of these investigations or not solve them. Because what happens when there's a murder or some crime that occurs and the evidence texts come out, a lot of times they have really good evidence. What happens when we go out to a fire and do a fire investigation? A lot of times, where's our evidence? It's burned up, right? It's not there. So we can't just make stuff up out of ash. And you will hear things like, well, you should have been able to find a match, a match head. And I'm fortunate enough to say that in almost 10 years I was doing fire investigations. So anyhow, that's where the investigation is. At this point, just like the press release says, we're a stopping point until other information comes in. And there was a lot of information that came in. I know there was a lot of people that were interviewed on this, and you can't, I don't know if the investigators had good quality witnesses. Sometimes you don't have quality witnesses either. That's it. And will that hold up in court if you were to put those people on the stand? It's everything in totality. The evidence is there, the interviews, what people saw, so if somebody comes out next week and says, hey, nobody ever interviewed me and I have my cell phone and I have this or new information, they'll open up and move forward. But unfortunately, at this point, we don't have anything. Another fire, just as an example in the area, October 8, 2014, the Applegate fire. Remember that was when we didn't have any aircraft flying and that fire took off on the south side of Interstate 80. And what was the cause of that fire? And I know I'm going on here, but I have a point. Does anybody know the cause of that fire? Well, if you looked at Facebook, it was a van. So en route to that fire, I was the lead investigator that day. I initiated a traffic stop going to that fire on the van that matched the description, put the license plate out over the radio. Somebody on his listened to a scanner, picked that up. The media got it. Later on that day, the media went to this guy's house and banged on his door and said, you're the one that lit the fire. What do you have to say? And shoved a microphone in his face. In fact, it wasn't him. So that's the kind of stuff that goes on with scanners, with Facebook, when people run and jump to conclusions. That fire was actually about 7 separate spots that grew together. That was, I never came up with, the only cause I could come up with is roadside, like vehicle cause. Catalytic converter and tire. That was it. So I found multiple pieces of catalytic converter on that fire, but boy, the public and the people that had their houses threatened, they were uptight about it. I can't, when you're a victim, yeah, you have the right to be uptight and be upset. I get that. I get that, but I'm,
Yeah, so
Thank you, chief.
if I summarize what you said,
yes,
right, so the investigation right now is closed.
correct,
That doesn't mean that it was arson or wasn't arson,
correct,
right? But you can't find enough evidence to carry it forward the next step.
correct.
Okay,
Yep, and the press release is saying it's human cause, so the investigators have something that says, yes, it's human cause. But what are the other causes of fire? Vehicle cause, human cause, railroad cause,
Yeah.
power line cause.
Mhm.
So that's caused by the railroad. Rule that out. It's pretty easy to rule out railroad fire.
so if anybody had any evidence that they haven't turned in already, what should they do?
They need to come forward. They can call it's unfortunate that CAL FIRE has an arson task force phone number that goes to Sacramento, and they do it that way so people remember, hey, I know the cause of this fire. They call the arson hotline. We still want people to call even if it's a fire, not this fire, but some other fire that's not arson. They can still call that number. Jeff, what's the phone number on the bottom? Or it's 1-800-468-4408, or they can call the Auburn, NEU Auburn headquarters.
Chief, do you mind repeating that phone number one more time, just to make sure that everybody had a chance to jot it down?
1-800-468-4408.
Thank you.
And the Auburn headquarters number is 530-889-0111. And just hit 0 for the operator and they'll guide you to where you need to be.
Okay,
Thank you.
yep,
More
thank you.
questions? Thank you. All right, thank you, Chief.
So other than that, I'll just end with a safety message in regards to the fuels that we have right now. There's been a lot of down vegetation due to the snowfall, and a lot of the property owners are burning that in piles and cleaning up around their property. I would just encourage them to do it in a safe manner and contact an air pollution management district for burn day status as we approach going further into the fire season.
Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you.
All right, next we have the Chamber of Commerce.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council members. We've had some restructuring in the Chamber of Commerce, and I am back as the president. I don't know if that's kind of like a bad penny that keeps showing up, or if it's even like Billy Martin, manager of the New York Yankees, who was fired and hired 5 times. So we'll see how this works out here. So we are definitely, we were affected by the virus and shutting down quite a few of our programs, but now we're continuing on with them and events, and so that is continuing on even stronger now. We have our calendar, as we have had in the past, that has continued on with all area. And also Tuesday, we had a ribbon cutting for Starbucks and a plaque presentation. A lot of people were going, Starbucks, they've been here for such a long time. Well, they just joined the chamber. And so we had kind of a reopening thing and excellent turnout. Obviously, we had a lot of the sheriff department that was there. So almost all of them. And I don't know if it's because of coffee and donuts. I don't want to get into at 8 o'clock at the chamber office. And after a quick discussion with Trinity, she will be our speaker at our next coffee and coffee. At TJ's Restaurant we're having our. Was that my 3 minutes?
No, you're
Or was it-
fine.
Okay. Yeah. Having our annual luncheon and general meeting. Scoop Thurman Award has been going on for many years. It's to our volunteers who really help out the community, and it's just been a great presentation. Invitations have been mailed out. They went out today, so you should be receiving them soon. Mixers will be starting back up in April. We're also looking forward to new businesses that are coming in town. And obviously the Mexican restaurant right down the street here is going to be fantastic. Also have a bicycle shop. He has been there for a while. He is at the end of Railroad Street, so not a whole lot of traffic going there. So we really want to help to start supporting him and getting businesses going down that way. It's like I say, not a lot of traffic. So other than that, that's the start. And here we go again.
Thank you, Tim. Do
Okay.
we have any questions from council? Or condolences? But thank you, Tim. All right, we have no presentations this evening, so we'll move to item 6. We do have a public hearing for SB 1383 compliance, and we will start with a presentation by staff.
Thank you for having me here tonight to present to you on SB 1383 implementation. I'm Carrie Baxter with R3 Consulting Group. Today, I'm just going to start by beginning with a little bit of background on solid waste. First, let's start with, next slide. California solid waste legislation history. CalRecycle plays a central role addressing climate change through diversion efforts. Next slide. Mandates through the years focus on source reduction, reducing, reusing, recycling. Their main focus, reducing greenhouse gases, waste diversion, landfill diversion, organic diversion, and recycling programs. As we go through the following slides, I'll cover each of these regulations in a little bit more detail. Next slide. Solid waste legislation started with AB 939 in 1989. This was the first of many unfunded mandates related to solid waste. This had an 11-year 5% diversion goal by 2020, or sorry, by 2000. And then AB 30.
And that first item you have up there, Colfax doesn't separate the trash.
That's
What
correct.
does that mean for us?
You actually send your waste to Western Placer and they sort it for you.
Mhm.
So it's still a requirement to divert material. It's not necessarily in your container, but it is still as a state law required to happen. So by taking it to that facility, it's still being sorted.
Is that true for the dumpsters that the businesses have?
Yes. Yep. All right, next slide. So in recent years, new regulations have been passed in our industry, which are AB 341 and AB 1826. Again, commercial multifamily residents are required through these laws to subscribe to recycling and organics collection services. Like you just mentioned, most are not really impacted at the business right now because they aren't having to separate. But the city is required to monitoring and reporting that out to the state. Next slide. Digesting biosolids, basically. It's not something that you're gonna find in your typical waste stream,
Okay,
but it's something that's going to organically decompose. So the main objective here is to set our efforts towards meeting those unfunded AB 32 reducing greenhouse gas emissions goals. SB 1383 is comprehensive and incorporates enforcement, which up until now has been lax, using a term good faith effort by the state. AB 939. Targets started in January of 2020 to reduce the total organics that go into our landfills by 50%. Then by July of 2020, this enforcement mechanisms in place, like a franchise agreement or an ordinance that requires these enforcement mechanisms. And then the one additional target that I just mentioned is the edible food recovery. The goal is, as a state, to reduce and recover up to 20% of edible food from our waste stream by 2025.
what does that mean?
It means any of the larger restaurants and grocery stores and such that generate food that can't be eaten, rather than allowing it just to go to waste. And throwing it into the trash can, taking it to a recovery organization and allowing that.
Expiration, they would be required to donate rather than waiting till expiration and then throwing it away.
Yes.
Okay,
All right, next slide. So from CalRecycle's perspective, this regulation has been designed to meet statewide targets regardless of the cost. All jurisdictions must have enforceable mechanisms like the ordinance that's in front of you tonight. And that includes extensive requirements and penalties for noncompliance. Those penalties range from $50 to $500 for businesses for not complying, and $500 to $10,000 a day for cities like the city of Colfax for not complying. It's basically changing the requirements from we shall offer this to we must provide it to our residents and businesses. The enforcement process and jurisdictions is different than under AB 939. Like many solid waste and recycling regulations, the city can be issued a violation and be subject to enforcement for failure to comply with any individual aspect of the regulation. Recycle factors that are specifically listed in the regulation as minor, moderate, and major violations. This things this beginning when to $10 that have enforcement.
what does this mean for the,
Actually meet a low population waiver requirement and have applied for that waiver. So for the city, you're eligible for that, meaning that you don't have organic waste collection services and record keeping requirements. Currently, it's a waiver for up to 5 years that exempts you from these. Container contamination minimization, meaning you don't have to sort through containers to make sure that there's no contamination of organic waste in the garbage container. You don't have to keep records of those site visits. You don't have to meet the container color requirements that are in the state law, where the rest of the state is changing all of their containers to gray container for trash, blue container for recycling, and green container for organics. That requirement's not currently being held to the city. And then organic generator requirements, meaning your customers aren't necessarily required to sorry, to sort out the organics currently. And then commercial business owner responsibilities, which there are some responsibilities within the law that require that a commercial business provide containers out for the public to use for separation of their materials. What it doesn't cover, and the city will be required to do, are the edible food recovery piece of the law, which all in all is one business in the whole city that we've identified. So ultimately, it's just going to be one restaurant or one grocery store that will have to make sure to keep records and save any edible food that is.
If we get the waiver, good for 1 year or 5 years?
It's a 5-year.
And is that 5-year renewable, or is that? Okay, that's important. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there going to be, I know this could always change, but are we looking at a sunset on the availability of those waivers at this time?
Yes, it's up to the state to make the determination if they can extend it or not. Currently, the law allows for up to 5 years, but then I believe it's within 1 year of that 5-year, the end of that 5-year term, then you can go back and request an additional extension.
Right, but you're not guaranteed to get it.
Right.
After the 5 years.
So is the current waiver we have good for 5 years?
Yes,
So we don't have to do anything different to have the waiver stay in force?
I think the ordinance still needs to be passed with the edible food recovery piece in it for it to stay active, so that you are in compliance with the piece of the law that is still required.
Okay.
So if this business falls out of compliance, do we lose our waiver?
If the business falls out of compliance with passing of this ordinance, you would have enforcement mechanisms in place to follow through. And I don't see how that would affect the waiver. You would just
Assuming
need
that we
to
follow through with our
follow through
end.
with the enforcement.
Okay. Right. I apologize, please
It's okay.
continue.
You can go to the next slide. This slide just represents basically what I explained of the changes in the ordinance. Basically, there's new definitions throughout, just to update with recent changes in law, but also the edible food recovery piece that requires the edible food generators, like your grocery stores, restaurants, to be in contact with a recovery organization, keep records of those, and then provide that record to the city. And if that
And a commercial edible food generator is the grocery store?
yes,
It is not a restaurant?
it can be a grocery store or a restaurant. They have 2 tiers defined within the law, and their thresholds are based on the size of the.
That's what I was
amount of
reading
seating.
in here. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So we have no restaurants that would be in tier 1.
No.
So only the grocery store would be tier 1.
There's one grocery store.
Okay. All right.
All right, next slide. The only other item that really is within this law is on procurement of materials to help with the use of the compost and mulch that is being collected from the program. And then also the procurement of recycled materials. The city offices and facilities are considered commercial traders, so they would also have to comply with 1383 by providing cooling.
Okay, so I don't understand that. So if we had 3 containers here at City Hall for the people that work in City Hall to separate their trash, and then we dump it into, so that our waste hauler then resorts it again, what's the point?
Containers.
We just have one trash can, everything goes in.
You should have 2. Do you not have a green container for?
We
green
do.
waste?
But the City Hall doesn't generate green waste.
Okay,
And there's no plants and trees and stuff like that,
gotcha.
right? So if the City Hall has one trash can
Mhm.
today,
Correct,
and we dump it into one bin that
Mhm.
goes to our waste hauler who then sorts it,
correct.
we don't need this 3 bin thing at City Hall.
No.
Okay,
As long as your
so
trash
where-
hauler is taking it and diverting
right.
it,
So where would this 3 bin thing be required in Colfax?
it would not.
Okay, so this slide is kind of interesting, but of no value.
Okay,
I'm just trying to understand,
that's fine.
right? Okay.
Okay, next slide. So SB 1383 includes blanket requirements that purchases of paper products, as you can see listed there, through the city and by vendors be consistent with the existing public contract code requirements regarding recycled content, which requires a minimum of 30% post-consumer fiber. And city staff will also need to keep records of all paper purchases, as those will be required to be reported on an annual basis.
And this slide only applies to the city,
Correct.
not residents, not
It'd
businesses.
be the city and anyone they contract with.
Okay, right?
Next slide. The environmental purchasing policy will be presented under a separate item at a future meeting and may include updates to meet SB 1383 requirements, including the purchase of use products like compost, mulch, and electricity from biomass conversion or renewable gas. And city staff and vendors would need to maintain records to report out to CalRecycle, like I said, annually. And last slide. After adoption of the revised ordinance, the city would need to implement that environmental purchasing policy, continue the ongoing partnership with the county to conduct inspections and investigations with the edible food recovery organizations and maintain records just to report out to the state.
Okay,
All right, wonderful, thank you. All right, at this time, I am going to go ahead and open the public hearing. Do we have any public testimony? All right, do we have any online?
Nothing on you.
All right, well, seeing none, we will go ahead and close the public hearing. Bring it back to council for any questions or discussion.
I have some questions on the ordinance piece.
Okay.
All right, so, and it's only half a dozen questions, so it's not a lot.
Sure.
So on page 32, 820.10 definitions, an approved solid waste container may also include any other container approved by the contractor. What in the world does that mean?
I would have to look.
And since contractor is not clearly defined in here, does that mean like if I hire a contractor, he can approve any container? Doesn't say which contractor. So I'm just trying to understand, what does the language there mean?
Can you
It's-
repeat the section again?
It's 820.10, 1 to 3rd paragraph, the 1, 2, 3, 4th line. Just so you know, I read all this stuff. So I don't understand the definition of contractor as used in that sentence there. Or the contractor can approve any other container. Mick, do you see where that's at?
I'm looking at the definition of contractor now, because I think that section you're referring to incorporates the definition that's lower, below.
This below, okay.
So that tells us what a contractor is. Yeah, I read that to kind of modify the first sentence, which says it has to be commercially manufactured. It can be made of galvanized metal, heavy duty plastic, pressed fiberboard, et cetera. Close fitting, removable, insect proof cover, and including a cover handle. I think that the container has to meet those requirements.
Right, but
in order to be approved.
I would just strike the may also include any other container. Because that opens it up to any other container.
Yeah, interesting. That's in the existing ordinance. That's not modified, so we just strike that out of the existing ordinance.
And that's a okay modification. That's not considered
That would not require a reintroduction.
perfect.
Okay, all right, and then two more paragraphs later on, you have a term that's called bulky waste, BULKY waste.
Yes.
Bulk waste I've heard of, I've never heard of bulky waste.
That's a typical term in
Okay.
solid waste.
And then underneath of it, except, it says in there about e-waste, except for universal waste. I couldn't find a definition of what universal waste is. Unless I missed it, but. So what is universal waste?
You're asking a lot of hard questions today.
Joe, may I chime in, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sorry, hopefully you guys can hear me. Apologize for not being there in person. Universal waste is defined by under state code. It's materials that the state has removed the hazardous waste requirement on it to encourage diversion. Computers, used car oil, batteries, that type of stuff. It all references back to the state code.
Right, but it has e-waste except for universal waste.
Because that can't be included with bulky waste.
That's correct.
Right. We put in parentheses on that as defined by state code.
Okay, all right, so next one. Down under disposal, so this is the next page down.
Which section is this?
Same section. So page 33, 1, 2, 3, about the fourth indented thing in there. It says disposal means final disposition of solid waste at a solid waste facility. Are there any other kind of facilities besides solid waste facilities that we're dealing with in this ordinance?
There could be organic facilities or recycling facilities.
So
This is likely to become applicable if we end up with the biomass projects. coming into
yeah.
play.
So I don't know why disposal only applies to solid waste. Disposal should apply to any waste at any approved facility.
No, because you would be processing it if it was going somewhere
Yeah.
else.
Disposal is like we're throwing it away. We're not upcycling it or doing anything with it. It's
So
tangible.
like for green waste, would go to a solid waste facility?
No, it would be processed in an organic waste processing facility. So it wouldn't be disposed, it would be recovered.
Joe,
Okay.
dispose means they basically put it in the landfill.
All right, so the next one I have is under diversion. And it says here, return these materials to a form of raw materials for new, used, reused, or reconstituted products which meet the quality standards necessary for commercial use or for other range purposes of reuse, basically recycle back into raw materials, can only be used for commercial use, can't be used for residential use. So in other words, if I was to recycle lumber from a building so that people could use it to build, let's say, buildings that were smaller in size than the length of the lumber would have been in that building, that could be used for residential stuff. This limits it to commercial use.
Well, it does say or for other purpose of reuse, and I think that the point of it, separating that out, is it does specify that if it is used for commercial use, it has to be an industry quality standard. So if it is reused for other use, that would be considered residential use, or if it went into the electric supply or any other use that's
Those
not
have the
defined by
same
commercial
standards.
use.
So the standards don't change depending upon whether it's residential or commercial.
Well, they do, because if you are diverting for residential use, you may be diverting those materials for whatever purpose you choose to do that is not requiring an inspection or some form of quality control. But if you plan to resell to another person, there are standards legally required for you to do so.
Okay, it just sounds to me like, I don't know why we would restrict part of it to commercial use and then say, or for other purposes of reuse, which the other purpose of reuse covers everything.
I feel like it's an important distinction, because if you do plan to resell those materials, they have to be quality. You can't just resell whatever you want.
Well,
You can use whatever you want in your own household, but you can't subject other people to that.
so if I sell recycled lumber that residents pick up,
That
I
would be
don't,
commercial.
I don't have, no, it's not commercial.
Would you be required to have a business license for that sale?
Well, there's no other purposes of use.
You're either doing it commercially or you're not.
I don't understand. I don't understand your
Wes,
comment.
maybe you can jump in on this, or
Thank you,
Nick.
Trinity. So it's trying to talk about the commercial standards. So recycling is generally conducted through commercial transaction. It is not generally done under residential. Usually, if it is, it's a very small portion. So they need to make sure they're meeting the industry standards for commercial diversion, whether it's going to biomass or if it's going to the WAPMA to take and get diverted and they sell off to third-party commercial contractors that are going to take the material and repurpose it. That's the intent behind this language. And the last statement in there is the catch-all, as you pointed out, Trinity. Did that help?
I think that's the difference between us saying, okay, you can put it in the green waste bin and it can be dealt with commercially, or we can have a chicken ordinance.
Yeah, well,
In which case residentially, you're dealing with your own diversion.
yeah, I'm thinking about like somebody's building the house
Mhm.
and the plywood that they're using for the house is 2 foot longer than the length of the wall they need. So they got a lot of pieces of good plywood that are 2 foot in length. Okay, because they had to cut it off to be able to put the plywood on the walls. Maybe they have 100 pieces of this. So that's a good thing to recycle for other uses. It could be commercial uses, it could be residential uses, right? So I want to make sure that
It's
this,
still raw material at that point.
And it's covered either way.
yeah, that's why I just make sure it's covered so that no matter which way we go, whether a contractor uses it
Mhm.
for building a house or whatever, or whether a resident uses it for building a chicken coop or whatever,
Right.
right? That maybe doesn't need an inspection, right? Right, so that either way, we want to make sure that stuff can be recycled
Mhm.
and we don't end up with, it can only be recycled if it's done commercially.
Right, and so that is what that last catch-all is at the end of it, but the reference to commercial is purely for making sure that it is industry standard if it's considered commercial.
Okay, so the next one I have down is on exempt waste. We include lead acid batteries, but what about batteries that contain lithium? Because in many cities, what we're seeing right now is they are recycling batteries that contain lithium because lithium is not mined in the US and is 100% recyclable like lead.
Mhm.
So
It's,
we
Joe,
have
if you
all
want, we
kinds
can
of
add,
really
we
good
can add
things in
that
here, but
statement in there. That's all kind of covered underneath. the
yeah,
universal.
I think we, I'm say it again.
It's covered under universal waste.
So the batteries and stuff, but unless Mick disagrees, we can just add the lithium battery statement in there as well. too.
Yeah, because I would think it would be worthwhile for the city to have a separate collection container for all lithium batteries
Yeah,
that the whole community can dump their batteries in. Otherwise, you know, they're gonna end up in the landfill because nobody's gonna find the batteries when they're sorting this stuff out. They're too small.
Yes.
Right, and
And then they start.
we
a
can
fire.
generate a lot of batteries for a city. You figure every household is gonna go through a couple batteries every month.
Especially with all our power outages.
Yeah, especially like for the power outage. I think I went through a case of AA batteries
Yeah.
during the power outage, right?
Mhm.
And I hate to throw them in regular trash because there's no way when they're sorted and stuff, they're gonna find the AA batteries.
Right.
Right? But if the city had one closet our batteries in,
I like it.
right? We get a lot of potentially hazardous stuff or 100% recyclable stuff out of the stream, right?
Those are good points,
I don't
Joe.
know.
So
That's
you're aware
something
that,
that,
sorry, apologize for cutting in.
sorry, what was that one?
I said, we have programs that are already in existence with our service contract with Ecology through Universal Waste, where they'll actually collect the batteries and other items from your home separated. And that type of stuff. We do have battery recycling in City Hall currently. And the MRF does collect batteries at the facility. They use a magnet system. I think they said they recover over a 55-gallon drum of batteries a day.
I don't know if lithium ion batteries are magnetic. So. All right. We answered that one. Okay. Page 35 under solid waste. LE.
Putrescible.
What is that?
Anything that rots.
Okay. Is this ordinance meant for the citizens of Colfax?
This ordinance is meant to meet the legal requirements and incorporates, terms and.
And it's for the citizens.
A part of the industry and part of what the legislature requires.
Could I just ask to put a parentheses after that and say what it is? I think it would be really helpful, because anybody reading this is going to say, we have no idea what that is.
You got it.
I feel like that's gonna be a common theme among almost all of our ordinances.
It may be, but it's like, otherwise, if you read it, you say like, who's it for? Right? And if it's only for lawyers, then the average citizen's never going to look at it or pay attention to it. Right? And I think, make sure. Oh, not quite. Page 43.
Can you say the number? Because I don't have the
Uh,
agenda in front of me. I just have the
sorry.
ordinance.
It's 8.20.190, service, standard service regulations.
Sure.
And it's item I. All business establishments engaged in the preparation, sale, distribution, or storage of perishable food products shall present solid waste for collection not less than twice weekly.
The only change there was changing the term from refuse, which was basically your definition for garbage.
That's not my
Solid
question.
waste.
My question is, where are we doing this twice weekly in Colfax? And it says not less than twice weekly. We're only doing this weekly in Colfax. So we're not compliant with our own ordinance.
Strike twice.
If you don't want it twice, it's only required to be once a week.
I would say just weekly collection. Otherwise, we've got to change our waste hauler to do twice weekly collection.
I'm wondering if that's because we do separate out green waste from regular. That's not where the twice came from?
No.
No.
Okay, because I know that's two separate collections that we
Yeah.
do weekly,
But this is specifically on food,
right?
right? So,
Yes,
Right.
some cities do require it twice a week, but it's not a state requirement.
Sure, people would love to have their garbage picked up twice a week. I know I would.
right. And then item P down here, standards to remain along or near any public street, sidewalk or parkway, excluding alleys, except, and it has things between the hours of 4 p.m. the preceding day to the day of collection. It's got a whole bunch of restrictions on here.
Mhm.
Is the alley the only place that we have as an, so Depot Alley, because the businesses have no place to put their trash cans normally? Is there any other place in Colfax that's not an alley where there's no place for people to put their trash cans?
I don't know.
Is that this one would say they can't put it if there's no other place. So I'm just thinking like in some of the small streets, like the ones that are like east of Forest Hill, where they're tiny streets going back in there. I don't know if people have room, and I think they can sit on the edge of the street.
We could add something along the lines of or as approved by the city manager.
Yeah, something like that. I think having that in there, because I just want to make sure we're not restricting it only, or excluding only the alley. Okay, and then I have one more comment down on 8.20.230, item B. And these are large venue events.
Participants during the day.
So this applies to railroad days. This will maybe apply to the 3rd of July, right?
If you have 2,000 participants in one 24-hour period.
Yeah, and we generally do.
Yeah, usually it can be up to 10,000 or more.
Yeah. Yeah, so all of that, this section then applies to these events.
Mhm.
And there's a whole bunch here that I don't think we're currently doing. So that puts a new demand on the people that are doing 3rd of July and railroad days.
Yes. Yeah, it looks like this is an entirely new
Yeah, it's all
set of
new.
language. And this is, to be clear, this is the minimum language that we're required to put in too, correct?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So are you proposing any language change there, Joe, or are you just saying this is something that we need to
I'm
make sure
just, I'm
everyone's aware of?
just, I'm just thinking that those two events, which are larger two events, there's a whole lot of things in here that I don't think they do today that they're gonna have to be doing, right?
And a lot of that will work with Recology to make sure that it's taken care of. I'm sure Recology will partner with the organization.
Okay, so in Colfax, we have a food bank that provides food to the community twice a month. The food banks now have to keep all these records that this section mandates as well.
That's a law mandate.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, which I'm sure they're not aware of,
Oh, they are stations with the food banks as well.
with the one in Colfax.
Uh,
Well, we
Talking
use
in
Placer
general.
Food
That's-
Bank,
Yeah, that's.
I'm talking about the one in Colfax.
I've talked with Sierra House, I've talked with Placer Food Bank,
That's
Nevada Food Bank.
That's
Yeah,
the food
but
bank.
Placer Food Bank is the distributor to the local food bank.
Yes.
I'm not talking about them.
Right.
I'm talking about the local food bank that's over here that one of the churches runs.
Are you talking about the food train?
Way to reach out to them.
Right, because I'm not sure they're aware of all the requirements they have to do.
I think they're just opening back up too.
And they're just opening back up too, so it's like, and some of these requirements. I won't say they're trivial. Right?
Mhm.
Allow the city to go onto any residential property?
Be excluded. Residential
Mhm.
from this.
Yeah, it says with the exception of the interior residential dwelling or unit. So I don't think that that excludes exterior property.
No, it includes the residence.
So to Joe's point, you would be able to go on the private property.
Yes. Now typically, I've done that in other jurisdictions. You go and get an inspection warrant. That gives you the right to go on property. Not technically required, but that's a process that's followed.
Right, so the city can then basically with this go into any property.
Even without this, you can do that under your basic nuisance ordinance. This does not change. That
Okay,
spells it out.
all right. Then on 8.20.270 enforcement, paragraph B says the health officer. Who's the health officer for Colfax?
City
The-
manager.
Or the Placer County Health Officer.
No, this doesn't say the Placer County. This is talking about the city. Which is, and then it has right in the middle of that, the health officer. And I can't find a definition of the health officer.
We can remove it.
What's that?
We can remove it.
Yeah, I have no problem if we say it's the city manager that's doing this or somebody he appoints.
Mhm.
Creating another position. Health officer. We got to. Yeah, that's in other places. We've seen that too. So chief of police has to come out.
Right.
And I would just say the city office, the city manager, or any, I would strike health officer as
Yeah.
well, because the manager is the one that's going to make the decision anyhow. Right? And you got the same problem in paragraph D as well.
That's 8.20.2, was it 290?
It's 270.
270, okay.
Yeah, enforcement.
So we'll just keep the city manager or enforcement agency.
Yeah. Oh. Or it could be the city manager or whoever the city manager appoints, that's all okay. But then we don't have. And we have a section that says a violation of this chapter may be punishable by the first violation is a base amount of $50 to $100 per violation.
Law.
That's okay, but I'm just trying to understand. So a person goes and they inspect a business or a residence and they find that they didn't have the 3 trash cans there, right? Even though it's not required because of the way our waste gets compressed and then resorted again. So can somebody get, if they did, is that 1 violation or 3 violations?
The only violation would be with the edible food recovery. Because that's the only thing we're really changing here, right?
No,
That's
it's,
the only provision that anyone is required to abide by is the edible food recovery at this time.
So.
So it's the only
Business
thing
was
punishable under
agreed-
the ordinance.
so my question was twofold. Make sure it's very clear what a violation is. So if 5 things are found when the property is inspected, and so on the one inspection, in my view is that should be, the language should be, so that's 1, because you want to give them the opportunity to correct it and not say, well, it's not $100 fine, it's a $500 fine because you got 5 violations.
If they are violating the more than one provision of the ordinance, and it says.
And based on the presentation earlier requirements, so that you can get a violation for any provision that you violated individually, not the state requirement as a whole. So I would say that would end up being at the discretion of the inspecting party.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're not abusing, like, said that violated their thing. And then they go over to the meat aisle, they have meat that violated their thing. And they go behind the building, they find another thing. It's like, my view is you treat it all as one, because our goal is not to punish people. Our fix.
Well, I think our goals and the state, then we probably need to recognize as we go through that.
Guidance to our inspector says,
Mhm.
first time, treat it all as one violation.
And you are the last resort of it. When it could come to council and somebody could say, hey, look, I got dinged for 5 violations, we've only really 1.
Mhm.
So it comes back to you anyway, ultimately.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, the question is, are the fines reasonable? Because if you say, I'll use the multiple 5, because there were 5 different things according to state law. So on the first one, they get $100 per third, they get 500, and on the fourth, I mean, and that's all on one time that a person came into their facility. It just seems like it doesn't make sense.
You're going to be able to address that on a case-by-case basis. That doesn't necessarily apply to every violation. You'll address what you'll do the inspection, address the problem on a case-by-case basis, assess what fine the inspector thinks is reasonable, then they'll go through the process as to whether it is or not, and you'll have ultimate say.
I think this is one of those times where our ability to capture isn't necessarily feasible. And this may become an issue later on, but there's no great way to capture it within the ordinance without specifically contradicting the state requirements.
Then these come right out of the statute.
Right. And that's
We didn't-
frustrating.
I'm going to use a New York State inspection thing. I had a house in New York State, and I built a garage off to the side, and went to get my inspection, and the inspector inspects till he finds the first defect.
Mhm.
So he found an electrical box, an old one that had a knockdown. He says, right, yep, and then he leaves.
Yep.
Then I have to pay for him to come out a second time. And he goes through to inspect till he finds the second. Then I had him out 5 to get through the inspection, as opposed to he's required to inspect the whole thing and do it all at once. It's cheaper for the city. It's cheaper for the residents, it's cheaper for the contractor. Everybody wins. Right?
That's policy direction you give your city council, your city manager.
Yeah.
All right, okay, that's all I have.
Marnie, did you have any comments, questions, or anything pertaining to the ordinance?
No.
I did have one question. So, as it requires us to obtain our energy source from what's considered just would be PG&E of our local CCA Pioneer, that do actually specifically make sure state law require us to enroll in those programs.
So last part again? I'm sorry.
The state law that's requiring us to go through this exercise with the ordinance, is this also going to essentially require us to enroll in those programs?
No.
Okay, well, that's a very good thing. Thank you. That's all I had. If we have no further comments or questions from council, I will go ahead and move to council action. At this time, do we have a motion on the floor to approve the ordinance forward with the changes mentioned?
Also move with the changes that we discussed.
And I'll second.
Shall we go through the changes real quick? Just
I think that would be a great idea.
There's the definition of approved container. We're going to strike any other. Under bulky, we're going to put a reference to the state code. That's under bulky waste. We're going to add an exemption for lithium ion batteries. We're going to put a parenthetical reference next to putrescible so people know what putrescible means. On page 43, item I, we're going to strike twice, so it's collection once a week instead of twice a week. Item P under the same section, we're not going to restrict it to the alley only, but to any other place where cans could be there, containers can be placed. On 2.230. Let's see, I don't quite know.
I don't think there were any changes there.
2.230, what's that?
No changes.
That was just a comment.
Yes, a
That was just a comment.
Okay, and then in the other sections, 8.20.270, we're going to remove the reference to health officer and police officer, wherever that shows in the ordinance. That's what I have.
Yeah, I think it's in a couple other
It
places.
is.
So
Yeah, I think we said that should be removed earlier.
Yeah.
At the staff level. it
Yeah.
just didn't get done.
I want to back up to the section with the alleyways and the
Yep.
can placement for that one. Are we saying, I'm sorry, what is it that we are trying to accomplish with this change?
So if you look at the properties that have no place to put trash cans, like the alleyway on Depot Street,
Correct.
you have to put the trash can on the street.
Right.
The ordinance says you can't put the trash can on the street except during those alleyways,
Yeah.
right? But they have no place to put it. And they can't store the trash inside their building because there's another code that says it can't be stored in the building.
Right.
So they would have no place to put trash.
Right.
So the alley is a real clear one, but I think we've got some residential places in other parts of the city where they end up putting the trash can on the street.
Mhm.
Right, because their property line is at the house, not 5 foot from the house.
Right. So I do understand that. I think what I'm asking is, are we changing it to at the discretion of the city manager, or are we changing it to just clarify that it's at any time where there is no other allowable?
I would do it real simple.
Okay,
Yeah, just a
perfect.
clarification.
Do the latter one because then we don't have to inspect it.
Right.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that that's what we were doing because. there
And then
had
if
been
we
a
find
reference earlier.
somebody who has room for a trash can, but is leaving them on the street, then you address that as a problem.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
Same.
So we have a motion and a second. Can I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Fitzgerald,
all right,
Mayor Pro Tem Mendoza,
Aye.
and Mayor Burse.
Aye. All right. So that concludes the public hearing on that item, and we will move to item 7, public comment. Do we have any public comment at this time? All right, Tim, come on down.
Hi, Tim Ryan, 300 South Main Street. I can definitely appreciate all the research and that you guys go through for these ordinances and to get them specific and squared away. And I think that is great for our community. I don't want to use a buzzword, but I don't know if possibly a lot of these questions can be asked before the city council meeting. I'm sorry. It did take quite a while to get through these. And, you know, we don't have a whole lot of people here right now. And I would much rather see so many more people and I don't know if we have people online quite a few there, but can meet or can't meet, but just a suggestion. But bottom line is, yes, all the information that you dig into and what you guys look into, great job.
Thank you very much, Tim. Do we have any additional public comment?
We have one speaker on Zoom.
Wonderful, thank you.
Mike, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mike Garabedian for the Friends of the North Fork. On the consent calendar, I raised my hand on Zoom to ask that item 3C be taken off the consent calendar, but was not given an opportunity to do that. And I would still like to have that opportunity to have that item presented and
I definitely, let's go ahead and do that. All right, so at this time, Mike, what I would like to do is I'd like to go ahead and finish the public comment section of the agenda, and then immediately preceding that, we will go into item 3C. Is that acceptable to you?
Thank you. Yes, of course.
Wonderful. If you have any additional public comments at this time, feel free to share them, unless they are specific to item 3C or another item on the agenda we haven't covered yet.
Just 3C at this time. Thank you.
Wonderful. Do we have any other public comment at this time?
Not at this time.
All right. Well, seeing no more public comment, we are going to go ahead and move backwards in the agenda. We're going to resurrect item 3C for discussion per public request.
Hello?
There we go. All right, Mike, we can hear you.
Thank you. First, a bit of background. I hike up the North Fork. When I walked by Bunch Creek, where it goes into the river, I heard it was quite an odoriferous place back in 1999, and that led to my involvement in the Colfax sewer plant, the 5-year renewal of its permit. The first hearing after that on the renewal of the permit resulted in an order. It wasn't a change in the order. It was an action to require the city to take action to explore infiltration and inflow. The report on the agenda item said that the city had issued a request for proposals, but no one had responded to it. But the Regional Water Quality Control Board didn't accept that, and then they did go ahead and begin to work on the infiltration and inflow. In fact, I believe that at 2 later hearings, we also commented on the progress of that and urged even stronger efforts to do that. Now, after I think 2 or 3 hearings on this, these are 5 years apart, the regional board concluded that the cost of proceeding with infiltration and inflow was not worth the result. Now, we strongly disagreed with this because, as is very common, if you fix part of a leaky system where water is leaking in and out, you fix that and then it causes more infiltration and inflow elsewhere in the system. So this looks like an important effort to apparently go back. Don't know if there's been work on what I, so to speak, since it was stopped. But I would appreciate having some understanding of what the status is of the older efforts and how this may relate to that, and where we're going from here with this proposal, what exactly it is and what's going to be done and what it's addressing. I assume it's addressing leaking in the collection system, although there also has been an issue of what the city doesn't manage, which is the feeding pipes into the system. So I hope that is clear, that I'm both hoping for a catch up on what happened before that stopped and how this relates to that and where we're going from here.
Thank you, Mike. At this time, I will say that you are onto the correct track with what this is intended to address. I will say, Wes, do we still have you on the line?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Wes, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to please speak for a moment on this item.
Sure, absolutely. Hey, Mike, thanks for the opportunity to speak on this item. You are absolutely correct. The city is, going to be doing another I&I project. It's coupled with 2 other projects that's going to be occurring with this contract that we're looking at currently is for construction management oversight with SOMAS. To my recollection, I think there's been a couple of I&I projects. This one will continue from where the last one left off. I believe at the last I&I project, before it was started, I think we had a peaking factor of 13. Whenever it was concluded and they did an analysis afterwards, they believed that we were at a peaking factor of 8. So that's 8 times more flow in the collection system in the rain months than in the dry months. I mean, ultimately, the goal is to try to get to 0, but it's very hard to get below 4. It's very challenging. For every dollar you spend, the return's just not there. So we're hoping that we can be able to continue the projects. We did a flow study last year. We put flow meters in during the storm period, pardon me, to identify the areas that are target areas. We'll now go beyond that, and we'll actually be doing a site-to-site reference point, where we'll actually be going from manhole to manhole in those designated areas to identify the deficiencies. And I do want to add one thing, Mike. We do have a little bit of control of the private laterals, only to the respects to the ordinance that we have adopted on there. If the property changes hands in a sale, that they're required by our ordinance to actually do an inspection of their private sewer line and repair any deficiencies. In addition to that, our building code requirements say any improvements over $20,000 also triggers the private sewer lateral improvements. Does that cover what you're looking for, Mike?
This is very welcome to know about. I wasn't aware of it before seeing the agenda item. It's very important because these waters affect the ability of the sewer plant to operate properly and affect the discharge, the water that is discharged from the plant and ultimately into the North Fork. So what you're doing is an effort to help improve and maintain the water quality of the North Fork American River, and we're glad to see it.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm going to go ahead and bring this back to council for a moment. Joe, did you have some comments?
Yeah, so this is part of an overall effort we have to look at the whole sewer system for the city of Colfax. Wes was talking about the peaking factors. So just so people understand it, if you take the driest month of the year and then you compare it to the wettest month of the year, that ratio is that peaking factor he's talking about. That's usually rainwater that's getting into the system. I've been walking through a lot of the commercial areas, and we've found a number of things where somebody's connected some pump that drains a spring that goes into their basement into the sewer. So what happens is during the rainy months, that pump runs almost continuous. During the dry months, the pump doesn't run. So even though it's not a leak in the system per se, it's something that a resident or an owner specifically did, which if they pump it out on the street, it's considered rainwater and there's no problem with it. But when they pump it in the sewer, then we have to treat it with chemicals and everything else, which raises our costs. So one of the big reasons that I'm pushing hard on trying to get this ratio down even lower than 8-to-1 is because it reduces some of the variable expense that we have in the city on the sewer plant. My ultimate goal is, how do we get our sewer bill down? How do we keep our sewer bill from growing? There are two different pieces, because we know like labor rates and chemical rates and gas prices and everything are going up. So how do we work on both of those to get the best deal for the city? And I'm a resident of the city, so it's important to me as well. So, all right.
Thank you for that recap, Joe. Yes, this is definitely as you had mentioned, Mike, this is something that is a decade or more in the making, and hopefully we'll start to see some actual results from it very soon. But as we all know, the wheels of government turn very slow, even at our best efforts. So,
Well,
Mike?
thank you. I would just add that if I'm not mistaken, the stormwater flows in Colfax also enter Bunch Creek. So, that it's both important as a stormwater issue and a sewer plant issue.
Yep.
Yep. Well, thank you very much. So I don't hear any requests for us to make a motion to rescind this item. So we'll go ahead and move forward with the agenda.
No reason to change it.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to item 8, council and staff committee reports. We'll go ahead and start with Councilmember Fatula.
Yeah, I've got no updates here, but I have one item that Wes asked me to bring up during the good of the order, so.
Okay.
Up there.
All right, Marnie, do you want to go ahead and?
I have no reports this evening.
Okay.
Last night you kind
Okay.
of update.
All right, perfect. So as far as reports for this evening, I think most of my content's fairly dry, so I don't have anything in particular to bring up outside of just a reminder that tomorrow PG&E will be at the Sierra Vista Community Center from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And that is to have their mobile command unit available with cooperation from Nevada and Placer County. So this is specifically for the purpose of people who were survivors of the river fire to be able to look at reconnecting service, what it takes to rebuild, especially if you're still at the very beginning stages of this process. This is an educational session where you can go ask questions and get the lead on the information you need. It was brought up during several of the calls that we had that this is happening during regular work hours. So if you are working during these hours and unable to attend for whatever reason, or childcare reasons, whatever it may be, feel free to reach out to city staff or council. We will get you guys connected with the right people so that we can get your questions answered. Since we do have Wes on the line, Wes, would you like to make a report this evening?
Madam Mayor, not tonight.
All right. So that being said, I will go ahead and close item 8 and we will move into item 9, council business, starting with 9A, our fiscal year 2021-2022 mid-year operating budget review.
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute recess. Thanks, Laurie. Call the open session back in order. All right, Lori, take it away.
Feel like I shouldn't have touched that. Good evening, Madam Mayor, Council. Lori Van Groningen, Finance Director. It's time to do our annual review of the what we call the mid-year budget review. This is required by our accounting policies. We generally present it in February. This is a carryover from last meeting. Thank you for carrying that over. The review just it entailed that we went through all the expense and operating budgets, each line item, and looked at the 6 months worth of data that we had for the year. We looked at activities that we have going on and made a projection of where we think we're going to come out compared to the budget. In your packet, there's some very detailed listings of what was taken. I'm going to talk very high level. Within the staff report, we show that overall, we expect that our operating revenues are going to come out slightly higher than forecast by about 0.9% or $47,000. And our operating expenses are also going to exceed budget by 2.4% and $103,000. So I'm going to hit just on some of the highlighted items that are in the staff report. We found that our land development fee activity has increased this year, and that increases not only our expenses, we're generally paying people to help with doing the land development planning projects, but then we do pass that cost on to the developer, so it also increases our revenues. Our estimate for transient occupancy taxes, we project that to come in lower than we'd anticipated, and that's primarily due to the delay in opening of the Best Western. We projected it to be sooner in the year.
Can I ask what occupancy rate you were?
8%.
No. What percentage of the facility is going to be occupied? Like, do you assume 50% occupancy, 80% occupancy?
I can't remember the exact that we used when we put together the budget, but we'll come up with those assumptions again when we look at the next year's budget.
Right.
Each
If I
year-
may,
Les, go ahead.
the occupancy we modeled for 50%.
I'm sorry, we can hardly hear you.
Sorry, we modeled 50% occupancy for the hotels.
Thank you, Wes.
Hopefully we'll have some good data here in the next few months too, now that they're in operation. Kind
Yeah,
of
and
see what's
they've
coming
been
in.
looking close to 100% occupancy. We could have some good news in that item.
Annually, we receive a COPS grant. It's not actually COPS, it is Citizens Option for Public Safety. It does have to be used for law enforcement. We receive $100,000 every year. Historically, for the last 4 or 5 years, there's been leftover funding in this, and so cities get credit for that. And we've this year we're getting $60,000, or we already received it. So that increased our revenues for the grant, which decreases the amount of expense for sheriff services that we have to put out of our general fund. We've talked about this before. We're not earning very much in our investment accounts. So we're projecting a less earnings for that for the year. We've had quite a few staffing vacancies for this year, and we've also found that the recruitment process has been lengthened during the pandemic. So we have some what I'll call cost savings in staffing for the fiscal year. Some of that hits on our reliance on our contracted services. Sometimes that means we require a little bit more effort there. We do have increased expenditures in our engineering and planning, and that goes along with all the projects and the development type of stuff that we have going on. We also have less expenditures in our forecast that we put in for like our building inspection fees and our finance service fees. When we did the budget for sewer service charges, we included an increase in the number of EDUs that we would be billing based on the new homes and of course the hotel opening, and we've seen a delay in that, so our revenues are coming in less. As you know, the solar project out at the plant has been delayed, and that was just due to the grant award process. When you deal with funding coming from government sources, sometimes it takes a little bit longer than we like, but that does also then parlay into a, we're not going to have the lower energy costs this year that we'd anticipated. We have revenue and expense category differences just due to the change in our contract with Placer County for fire services, just up and down. And then the last thing that I pointed out here is that we're seeing lower forecasts for things like trainings and conferences, and that's all obviously been due to the pandemic also. So that's, a very high level. Like I said, there's some very detailed things in here. We'll take all this information as we move into the next 2-year budget process, which we have kicked off. We had a staff meeting this morning to do that. There's a calendar in here of activities. We probably won't hit all the dates, but we'll hit the ending date for sure, that we'll have our 2-year budget presented to you in early June for approval. We've got tentatively scheduled for a council workshop early in May. So we'll bring all of our staff recommendations forward at that time and hold a public workshop probably during the day like we have in the past. With that too, we'll be completing our other required processes for the annual financial, which will be reviewing our accounting procedure, reviewing our investment policy. We established the GAN appropriation limit each year, and we need to have just a good overall discussion on fraud and risk concerns. So with that, I'll take any questions or.
Yeah. So Lori, I have a question as far as our staffing shortfalls we've had over the last year. Well, actually, this is kind of going into 2 years of sort of a shaky staffing situation. You did mention that we have had to supplement with contract work to fill those gaps. As far as our budget is concerned, did we end up coming out with a savings due to that required supplementation, or did we end up in a budget shortfall due to that supplementation?
I think we came out ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess maybe I misspoke a little bit when I said that when we supplemented with engineering and where we're coming in over on engineering and planning, that wasn't really supplementing the type of staffing shortages that we had.
Right,
We had
right.
staffing shortages and we might put a temporary person, like we've had some temporary support out at the plant here recently.
Or us bringing in Simpson and Simpson because we were short on field personnel, things like that.
Yeah.
I understand that might not be a question that we necessarily have an answer to today.
Right.
But I am hoping that when we move into our budgeting activities to set up the next year's budget, we can kind of have that ready as something that we can take into consideration.
Yeah.
Joe, did you have any questions?
Nope, I went through this in a lot of detail.
Great.
Barney?
I just have one question. You said that we did a little bit of savings because of the trainings and that type of, activities that prior to pandemic we did. Is there like an estimate of what was actually saved?
No, I'd have to go through the individual schedules.
okay.
I mean, I can guess $20,000.
Okay, thank you.
And that might be something for us to look to the future on for council policy, that when trainings are available from a remote setting or things like that, take into consideration whether or not the cost of sending someone in person, there's a tangible benefit that outweighs that additional cost, because the landscape has really changed with the availability of training. Oh, let's see here. I do have additional comments, but I don't think this is the appropriate time for them. I think I'm gonna save them for when we actually have our workshop on the upcoming budget.
Yeah, and anything you could feed to us beforehand would be helpful.
Perfect. Do we have any comments from the public on this item? Come on up. You gotta come on up, Tim. Sorry, you gotta get on the mic. The public online has to hear you too.
Yeah. So Laura, I was going to ask about the transient occupant tax. Is that something that is set or does that fluctuate? And how, if it fluctuates, how do we address that?
Lori, do you mind if I answer this one?
Oh.
So Tim, this is actually something that is set in stone and it requires voter approval for us to change. Currently, we are at 8% and the state standard is 10%. And this is actually something we are expecting to have come up in an upcoming ballot measure for this year. So this is going to be a public outreach opportunity for all of council to really get out there and talk to the public so everybody understands that this new tax you're going to see on your ballot, and I hope the chamber can help us with the education campaign on this as well. This is not a tax to people who live here. This is a tax to people visiting here so that they can pay their fair share in maintaining the infrastructure that they're borrowing while they are our guest. So Lori, I hope that you don't mind me stepping on your toes for a second there.
Perfect.
So much. Yeah.
Do we have any additional public comments on this? Nothing online?
Nothing online.
Wonderful. All right, well, council, if you don't have any more questions, we can entertain a motion to,
Motion to approve.
No action
nine.
required, it's just
Oh.
review.
we don't have to approve the budget amendments?
Oh, I'm sorry, you do. Yes,
Okay.
motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, can I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Fitzgerald. Mayor Pro Tem Mendoza.
I,
And Mayor Burse.
Aye. All right, wonderful. Moving to item 9B, Placer Homeless Action Phase 1 Report, Letter of Recommended Guidance Recommendation. Wes, do you want to open up the discussion on this?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll kind of kick it off and then I'm going to hand it over to the council sign ad hoc committee. Is this staff report? Let me get to it. I apologize. Give me just 1 second. As the staff report indicates that the Placer Homeless Ad Hoc Committees met several times with the Placer County consultant MIG to go through and adopt or identify policies that would be guiding policies to move forward to do public outreach. In those discussions, I believe there was a sense that maybe there wasn't, I'd say, full transparency in the process and keeping it moving forward. Subsequently, the ad hoc committee asked the county MIG to meet one more time to discuss their concerns with the report. That meeting did occur. And at the subsequent end of that meeting on February 24th, MIG was not willing to make any edit changes or consider having any further discussions, which I assume was at the county's direction. Since then, like I said, the ad hoc committee asked me to bring the item forward, provide the final report to council, engage and see if there's support to develop a letter, send it to the county requesting that MIG continue the conversation with the ad hoc committee at this point. I will note that being on that last meeting, I think the sentiment that the document was not complete was shared by all jurisdictions.
Thank you, Wes. I'm going to comment as one of the ad hoc committee members here. Wes is being very kind right now. There were major issues with the report, the process, everything about it. These issues were voiced very strongly with large consensus from.
But I ask you just step back just for 1 step. Describe what the objective, what this was.
So I'm going to get to that part. Fundamentally, where we stood with this is we had a group of elected officials that were brought into a room to discuss an issue that affects all of our jurisdictions equally, but in different ways. And the general consensus that we had at the end of this discussion was that there was a lack of transparency and a lack of good faith effort to work with us from the perspective of the consultant. We very, I felt politely asked that we revisit this. We went through our concerns. We mentioned the many issues, and I do hope council's taken some time to read through the report. There were a lot of issues we had with this report. And again, lack of transparency and where comments were coming from, and a lack of thorough representation as to what the comments meant, or a true gauge as to whether or not there were consensus on some of the items. We were told by the consultant that this is their report and they will not be changing it because it's their interpretation of the process. Now, to clarify, this report is directly regarding our homeless population within the county and our policies and how we plan to move forward with this. And I think our understanding, and Marnie, correct me if you have a different perspective here, when we came to the table for this ad hoc committee, our understanding of what we were coming there to do was to figure out where our primary issues were so that we could then take it to our public to form a baseline of potential solutions and involve in a transparent process some policies and narrow those policies down to what might work within the region and within different areas of the region. That is not how this ended up going. What ended up happening was we were presented with a list of policies and told yes or no. And even though there was a whole lot of no, somehow we still are ending up with a report that looks like there's a whole lot of yes.
And then may I?
Go for it.
And then a lot of wasted time, because I want to say that we were in this numerous meetings for about 6 months. But when a public official is told that their opinion doesn't matter, I'm sorry. I'm just really glad that we all rallied together on this. Because the point being is we sit here representing the people. So if we don't have public input, what good is it? You know, what good is it? And that's just something that they didn't want to move.
It was
I'm not
very
gonna be
interesting.
polite, I'm gonna be blunt, because that's what happened.
The report there were some interesting practices as this report came out, and one of them was the select choosing of quotes from what we believe to be a closed session or private session, I should say. Which again, it's not that we wanted a private session, the entire resounding commentary was that we wanted this to be transparent and open to the public. But the issue is that choice quotes were included in the final report. But then when we went down through the individual policies, one by one, person by person, the individual where we sat on those issues was not recorded and made transparent for the public. So I'm going to go ahead and address the elephant in the room. There is a project that has been presented privately to several elected officials within the county, and that is the Campus of Hope project. And throughout this entire process, there has been a feeling in the room among all participants that this is an inevitable, not an option, not something that is, a potential item on the portfolio that we may be able to pick from. But I think everybody feels like we're being forced down a path towards a specific result. And that is where I asked Wes to please agendize this to make sure that the report was reviewed by our council, and our council had an opportunity to tell the county how we feel about this and that we think there's more conversation to be had and potentially the format needs to change.
Yeah.
Wes, did I capture your understanding as well? Because Wes was also, he was listening to these meetings.
Yeah, you hit it perfectly, Trinity. I personally, as your manager, was a little appalled by MIG's approach. I can say this much, and I can be very transparent about it, is you will never see an MIG contract come before council. It was not very professional in my opinion.
What Wes was saying that the contractor that was used for this process will never, ever be brought forward to this council by this city manager for our consideration to contract with, based on the experience we had for the last several months going through this.
Yeah. Are you done, Wes?
Go ahead, Marnie.
Yeah, so
I'm done.
Add, so when, and this was a whole, like, all the elected officials, well, not all of the
ones that were
which
appointed to the ad
ones, but
hoc.
just say like this, city elected officials were in the room. And so when we say we want to hear from public comment, on what their opinions are, we're talking about our business owners, we're talking about, residents, basically everybody at the table, not just the direction of the consultants.
I don't mean for
right?
this item to be sort of an event session, but to a certain degree, I feel like it's necessary so that the public can understand me and Marnie's frustration going through this process that is shared resoundingly by elected officials from some other major cities within our county. We felt like this was really putting the cart before the horse, that there wasn't a lot of public transparency and that there was sort of an inevitable decision that we were being led towards. And, again, this Campus of Hope project that has been sort of the elephant in the room throughout this process, this isn't something we're talking about putting up in Colfax, but it is something that, we're talking about could potentially be implemented in South Placer County, which is part of our greater community. And we should take an interest in it, and we should have an opinion on it. And if Lincoln, Roseville, Rockland all say flat no, we don't want this, we should be standing behind them. And that's a big part of where I'm coming to the table on this is I really feel like the community should be involved, and this process needs to be restructured before anything comes to light out of this that becomes tangible. So, Joe, I don't know if you have any questions, comments?
Oh, I read through this thing with a fine tooth comb. So I'll try to do just a 2-minute summary on this. So what they're trying to do here is say, we want to solve the root cause of the homeless situation. And all of their things is about putting homeless people in the homes. And it's like, that's not the root cause of homelessness. If you look at all the studies that I've seen, it says the root cause of homelessness, there are a small percentage, usually in the range of around 5%, that are people that have lost their jobs, lost their homes, et cetera. And they're usually at centers to get them back into the job market, like the Gathering Inn, because they have rules that say, like, you can't be on drugs, you can't be on alcohol, you have to follow our guidelines to be in these programs. And you find that group of people, which is only a small percentage, gets right back into a program and eventually gets back into the job market, gets back into home, et cetera. The bulk of the rest of the people are either on drugs or alcohol or are mentally disabled, so that they need care. And short-term care, which this study's got a whole section on, providing them short-term emergency 24-hour care if you're on drugs. It's like, having been volunteering at Team Challenge up at Emigrant Gap for the last probably 6 months, there is no program that restores a person back to, quote, health that's less than about a year or two in length. All these things that are 30 days, 10 days, 90 days, spend a lot of money. The person goes through the program, gets off drugs or alcohol, and then 3 weeks later, they're back, right? So it's as though almost the program providers' focus is making money by getting people back through the program multiple times, as opposed to trying to fix the root cause. So if their statement in here is they want to fix the root cause, I can't find anything in here that's addressing the root cause. It's all addressing symptoms. It's kind of like if your doctor said, oh, I broke my leg. Okay, take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning, right? It may solve your problem with pain for a while, but it's not going to fix the cause of the problem. And there's too much of this that's not focused on the root cause.
So ironically, without getting into the actual issue of homelessness itself and, the many complex issues that we could honestly go on for hours about, I think you hit on the really big point here indirectly, that not only is this report sort of addressing symptoms, so on and so forth, but the way that this process was structured, the results were essentially presented to the ad hoc committee to basically say, yes, no, support, not support. Here's sort of your predefined bits and pieces that we're going to, sort of ask you to head nod at, rather than going back to the beginning of the process and the core fundamentals of what we exist for, which is policymaking. And fundamentally, if we are going to have a successful approach at this that actually truly incorporates the input of our public and our elected officials and our jurisdictions as a whole, we have to be involved in the policymaking portion and the origination of that discussion. And that is a huge part that was just completely left out of this process. It skipped directly to, here's what we think the solutions are, let's talk about that, not let's start at the beginning. And that's why this is in front of the council tonight, to basically ask the county to give us some more time to do this right instead of rushing it. Because I think we can all agree that when it comes to public policy, especially when we're talking about potentially dumping a very large amount of money into solving an issue that affects everybody in this state, it's really important that we do it right the first time, not just slap a Band-Aid on it. So that would be my ask to council this evening, is considering the report that you've now had the opportunity to read, and accepting our testimony, having been first party to this process. Our ask to council is that you guys support us in asking the county to let us take another look at this and maybe reconsider the structure.
I have 3 suggestions. Right, and I'll just read my 3 suggestions. Number 1, fire the consultant. This is not the consultant you want in this program. Right. Number 2, identify the root cause of the homeless stuff. And number 3 is, once you've identified the cause, then work on solutions to eliminate the cause. One of them may be housing, it may not be housing, but at least identify the root cause first.
Right.
And if you don't do that, it's like you're working on a solution that may have no effect on the problem.
Exactly.
Yep.
And that's the thing, all of our potential solutions might vary wildly.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, if we're not starting at the beginning of the process and working through, and we're working backwards, we're not going to come up with a solution that's actually going to implement meaningful change.
Yeah.
We'll say we did something, we'll pat ourselves on the back.
And you'll spend a lot of money.
Exactly.
A lot of money.
Which is what I feel has already happened at this point. So, do we have any public comment? Come on up. Come on up, Diane.
Pull that up, pull that mic up. Or you can hold it.
Whatever you want to do.
There, excuse me. I know what you're saying, and you got to get to the source. I know in Oakland, they had a big project. They put a lot of people in there. They destroyed the housing, first of all. Second of all, I know that the source is drugs and alcohol and all that stuff is so out of control now. It's like almost everything seems like there is no solution. Because there's, just in my neighborhood before I came up here, 3 drug places, and they just hop from one place to the next. The borders, all these drugs coming in. There's so many drugs here that it's almost impossible to stop it. And I've talked to the police about this. They have a hard time. Their hands are tied lots of times where they can't follow through with what they need to do. It is a big mess. So I don't good luck with the solution.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mary, and I will second what you said about the consultants, because I got to hear them a year ago at a city county dinner, and it sounded like it was a done deal then, in a nice little brochure, like, this is what we're doing. I did have a question though. I thought there was something in there about camping rules in public areas, and I just wanted you to address that for the public to know.
Yes, so if you guys have an opportunity to take a look at the report, you guys might notice that there's several bullet points that you can go through where they're numbering out specific potential solutions that they've already put on the table. And of those specific potential solutions, whether they be interim or permanent, they essentially asked all of us to go down through that list and provide our input as to whether or not we are agreeable to those solutions. And as it pertained to the temporary camping, there was essentially a resounding no across the board from all elected officials. I don't remember, and I'm going to say this as a matter of, I wasn't sitting there keeping the record and taking notes, but I can't specifically remember any elected official on that call saying, I am firmly in support of these campgrounds. I think that there was a pretty resounding sentiment that was sort of a lazy solution. that didn't address the long-term needs of the people involved. And that, again, it was one of those potential things where you're patting yourself on the back that you did something, but did you really help anybody? And, you know, again, as we talk about this report, I'm trying to be careful about not getting too deep into the conversation of homelessness because we really could go on all night about it. But there are a lot of factors involved in it. And, you know, living in California right now, we do have a huge issue with the increased price of housing and the lack of wages that are not coming up to speed with those housing prices, rent increases. And a lot of that has to do with outside investors outside of the community owning property and a lack of community ownership of property. All of those issues need to be part of the fundamental conversation when we're talking about what actions we are willing and capable of taking and whether or not those actions are actually going to make meaningful change in the lives of Placer County residents who just happen to not have homes. You know, I don't want to get into whether or not, you know, it's because people are on drugs or whatever right now, because obviously that's not what we're here to deep dive into. But I just want to say that I really appreciate the support from council and from the public to bring this back to the county and say that we need to have a much better conversation, a more transparent conversation, and just put more quality behind it. So again, when we do something, it's meaningful.
Right. But I think you got to specifically tell the county, they have to identify the root cause and use that to test any solution against that says, does it solve the root cause?
Exactly.
If it doesn't, it's a solution, but.
Well, and there's different solutions to different root causes, and that's what it is at the end of the day. And not all people are going to be eligible for the same programs in order to enact reasonable change or meaningful change.
Yeah, and you don't want to put everybody into one facility either, because you have people that have been
That was a
involved
huge
with
concern.
domestic violence and, you know, victims. And so, yeah, just.
We have the ability to be a little more custom with our solutions, and that's what we need to do.
And one of the things that's always missing these is a metric that shows whether it's effective or not, right? When I look at if you ever want to go out on the web and search for Teen Challenge and look at what their success rate is, measured after 5 years, they're over 85% success of people having a home, being back in the job market, being a good citizen of the community. And when you look at our state programs, I'd like to say they're as high as 5%. And they spend a whole lot more money. And Team Challenge is basically free to anybody who goes in the program.
And not from tax money.
Not from tax money.
Well, again,
I'd like to get one of those guys to come down here and take 10 minutes at one of our meetings and just say, here's what they do, here's what it's about. Because there may be opportunities for other citizens in Colfax that they're struggling with a family member and all, and said like, I don't know what to do and what to try.
Right. Well, and again, like I said, you know, we don't want to necessarily deep dive into the solutions because it's very intricate and there's a lot of different approaches for different situations. But I will ask council if I can get a motion to approve sending this letter to the county. I think that would definitely be the first step in us having a better quality discussion.
I'll move and I'll give you a suggestion of those 3 items. I think you need to be in there. I think you need a different consultant. I think you need to go back and identify the root causes. And then I think you need to target solutions specific to the root causes.
Thank you.
And I second that as long as we have those 3 items.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Fichula,
Right.
Mayor Pro Tem Mendoza,
Aye.
and Mayor Burrs.
Aye. All right. Crossing that one off. Let's go ahead and go to the order. Joe, what do you got?
I'd like to get an item, if we can get a couple people to agree on, that goes on to one of our future agendas. So we got new businesses coming into downtown. We got some new stuff going over in the I-80 corridor area. I'd like to get council to discuss putting about $20,000 to kind of do what Carmel did when it was redeveloping itself. It just all the street poles from its one area where people come in all the way down to its downtown area, the other area, and it put Christmas tree lights on all of them. It probably costs us way less than that, but I'm just saying something like 20 grand, right? I think it's a kind of a project that if we could fund some money there, maybe the chamber could synchronize doing it and just to take it out of like talking about and doing something concrete. I think it would be significant for the businesses in the downtown area here. And I think it would be significant for the business over by the hotel and stuff like there, because it shows people it's all connected together. So you get people going between both. And I'd like to see like our new Mexican restaurant, I'd like to see that place succeed big time. And as a city, one of the question is, what are we doing to help our community? And we talk about it, but we haven't done anything. So I'd like to take it out of the talking about and say, can we do something?
Wes or Mick, could you guys advise, would this, I think the appropriate platform for us to have this discussion would be under our budget discussion, since this is specifically a request for a budget
is
item?
certainly is a good place for it. We can also put it on as a separate agenda item for general
If
discussion.
we do it as a general item, we say, is this something we want to do? And then maybe the
then
budget is what
incorporate it?
goes next.
Yeah, I'd definitely be open to agendizing that, Marnie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's,
I did it. No.
unless you're in an extreme sense of urgency to get it on the next agenda, how about we have you regroup with Wes and then figure out where it'll fit best, and then we'll
I'll leave it up to you. Let's say within the next month,
Okay.
find an agenda to put it on.
sounds
We'll give
great.
us 3 different meetings to see what will fit.
Did you have any other items?
Nope, that was the key one.
Marnie, do you have anything for the good of the order?
No.
All right, I do not either, so we will go.
I do.
Oh,
I do.
sorry, who does?
Mike Arabedian does.
I apologize, Mike. Good of the order is usually just for council members to bring items up for future agenda. Is this something that you intended to originally bring up during public comment?
You didn't ask for any comment on the homeless item. My hand was raised the whole time.
I apologize.
Well, that's it. I don't want to speak because you've already acted on it, so forget it. Thank you, though, for apologizing. I appreciate that.
Well, Mike, if you do have comments, I'd be more than happy to take them at this time. And if the comments do influence our decision, I'd be happy to backtrack to the item.
Well, I don't want to backtrack, but I'll just try to summarize very quickly. I had a chance to review the report while I was waiting. I have not been involved in this issue before. And so I appreciate an opportunity to make a couple comments. I noticed the focus very much on chronic homelessness, and the quick points, sort of one sentence points I'll make is I heard an expert testify to the legislature about 2 years ago in detail about how many people temporarily experience homelessness when they lose their home. And I've noticed as another one sentence item that there seemed to be an increasing number of foreclosures, but including in your city area in the newspaper. And I think there's a real important question to see how effectively, and apparently it happens, temporary homelessness help people not to turn into chronic situation. I'm surprised to see that the schools aren't listed as being involved. Many of us have heard that school teachers find out students are homeless, so why aren't they involved in this process is a question. And another sentence point is that I'm sure we all know people who moved out of the county and may have something like this happen, and the county staff has assiduously refused to say how many people are moving out of the county, though they say that they know. Anyway, those are the kind of thoughts, some of the kinds of thoughts I had to mention that I didn't readily see addressed. Thank you.
thank you, Mike. I do share many of your sentiments here and I appreciate your comments. And I apologize that we weren't able to incorporate you when we took public comment. So we'll try to be a little more diligent about taking the online comments. So thank you.
Thanks for giving me a chance.
All right, wonderful. Well, at this time, if we have nothing else from council for good of the order, and if I have not missed anybody else online, we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you.